Welcome to Creating a Culturally Responsive Classroom. My name is Martha Goldley, and I'll be the narrator for today's webinar. This is the second of two webinars sponsored through the Voices on the Land grant, which is a partnership between Sealaska Heritage Institute and SERC. We welcome you today, and we hope that you enjoy this learning experience with us. Next, we're going to look at our working agreements, and these are from First Alaskans, and we like them, and we've got permission to use them. And the one that we get a lot of chatter off of is "Takest thou hats off," and I'm sure you all realize that that's just, we all enter the room maybe with different titles. We might be the counselor, we might be the principal, we might be the classroom teacher, we might be the noon duty aide, we might be the lunchroom person, we might be a TA. But however we enter the room, we take that hat off and we become equal in learning. So today's learning, we're going to show you, we hope that you will come away with a good understanding of how to use a unit protocol to unpack a unit, and how to use another template to unpack a standard. So those are the two things we're going to walk you through today. And some of these, you're going to pause the PowerPoint and you're going to have some work time on your own. We're going to tie these experiences to Culture in the Classroom, which is a book published by SERC. And by now, I think you're all pretty well acquainted with this. There are 5 cultural standards. Standard C, shown here, addresses the need for is not shown here, but it addresses the need for educators to be involved in the community. And since that isn't observable in the classroom, and these are Alaska Cultural Standards and Indicators for Teacher Evaluation, Standard C was not adopted as part of teacher evaluation because it's not observable in the classroom. But I want us to get away from the word evaluation. Evaluation has always been what good teachers do. They evaluate what your pedagogy demands that you do to be an effective teacher. So these are just wonderful strategies that you're probably already using. So Standard A connects content with the culture of the students, using their current knowledge to bridge or scaffold to what's to be learned. Standard B connects all students to their local environment as a primary means for making those larger global connections, for branching out. Standard D brings in the family, because when a child enrolls in school, it just isn't one child you're dealing with. You really enroll the whole family. And as educators, we often forget this and leave the family in the background. Standard E addresses the educator's need for equity and rigor in teaching all students, having those high expectations. So first, we're going to look at, I'm sorry for that, it just is being a little temperamental here this morning. We looked at the standards. Now these standards are really strategies. You're not going to find content here like this student is, and these are strategies for teachers to use to reach student outcomes. So first, let's take a look at the unit protocol. And you have both of these handouts. You've got the booklet, Culture in the Classroom. You've got the protocol for unpacking the standard. So what we're going to do now is you are going to take 10 minutes at your table group, partners, however you would like to organize your learning experience, and you're going to take a look at the 5, there's 4 phases in this protocol, but there's really 5 if you consider phase 0. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to talk and discuss this and see where, when it says right here, what about the unit topic can be used to engage students in their learning? Take a look over at CA4 and then turn to that page in the book and see the different strategies you can use to engage students in their learning. This is your 10-minute talk time. When you come back, be sure to discuss what did you notice about the protocol and what stood out for you. Okay, as you did your crosswalk, you probably noticed that the protocol for unpacking a unit resembles the backward by design planning process. And this protocol is so useful because where Wiggins and McTighe just had headings, this supplies the content of what should go under those headings. So you talk about what in this unit will hook the students. You talk about how you can engage them in the critical thinking about the various cultural perspectives or worldviews that they bring. And what about this unit material builds your sense of curiosity? How can you leverage what students know, where they live, their experiences with engaging them? Because that old adage, the window to learning is really called engagement, is very true. If students are not engaged, they are not learning. So it's critical in these first starts, this first start of the unit, that you build in the relevance, the curiosity, and the higher order thinking as bridges to the content you want to present. So we're going to take a look at phase one. Phase one has two parts, A and B, and the whole thing should take you about 30 to 40 minutes. Now this protocol, you can sit down by yourself and you can be successful. It's better if you have a partner to bounce things off of. So step one, understand the unit outcomes and the vertical articulation. And what we mean by this is, what is your vision for your unit? What do you want students to walk away knowing? And then because of differentiation, you have to take a look at after you've chosen your standard, that what standard came before this, the grade level before this, and what will come after this. That's what we mean by taking a look at your vertical articulation. So then you think about, how do the outcomes fit with the Alaska standards? We talked about that before and after your grade. And the web link there is right to the State of Alaska's page for standards, and it's wonderful. And you take a look at your vertical articulation again, what's happening this year along the development and related outcomes, what happened last year and where are they going next year. That gives you more of a global perspective to differentiate. So then, this is phase B. You have to unpack the rigor. What level of cognitive complexity is reflected in your unit outcome? And when we talk about rigor, what is it? Oh, here we go again. Okay, what is rigor? Okay, let's take a look at the graphic here. Quadrant A represents simple recall and basic understanding of knowledge for its own sake. Quadrant C represents more complex thinking, but still knowledge for its own sake. Examples of Quadrant A knowledge are knowing that the world is round, that Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. Quadrant C embraces higher levels of knowledge, such as knowing how the U.S. political system works and analyzing the benefits and challenges of the cultural diversity of this nation versus other nations. So it's cognitively higher. However, its application is low. Quadrants B and D represent actions or high degrees of application. Quadrant B would include knowledge of how to use the math skills to make purchases and count change, the ability to access information in a wide area network systems, and the ability to gather knowledge from a variety of sources to solve complex problems in the workplace are examples of Quadrant D knowledge. So for rigor to be where it should be in quadrant D. By the time you let go of students, you should have reached the high cognitive taxonomy, and you should have released students so that they own it. Student autonomy. They're able to apply it to the real world in unpredictable situations and predictable situations. So all of this, phase 1, A and B, should take you about 30 to 40 minutes, because you're just laying down now your 30,000 foot view. You did 0. What's my big idea? How am I going to cook? How am I going to make it relevant? Step 1, you've looked at your standards, you've unpacked them, you've decided on your cognitive complexity levels. Now, phase 2 is going to take another 30 or 40 minutes, and that's understanding the flow of your unit. So you've picked your standards, you know what you want to accomplish. So now you have to decide on your benchmarks. So you're going to divide everything into available class periods or time slots to determine how to fit the pieces into the unit. Build in extra time for review and enrichment to ensure that all students have learned the material. With each lesson, pinpoint the specific goals and desired outcomes that are to be met to ensure your students will meet the learning goals of the overall unit, the benchmark. So, and the benchmarks are the chunks. They're not your daily lessons. Your daily lessons will make sure that the benchmarks are met. Benchmarks come from your standards. Next, you're going to identify how you'll formatively assess each progress or benchmark so that you can make decisions. Do you have to regroup? Do you have to reteach? What do you have to do? So as you plan, you constantly ask, how can I prove that students have learned this benchmark, this chunk of content? What will I do for those who know and those who do not know? These questions and reflective responses ensure that all students will understand and achieve. If done well, unit plans combine lessons in a way that can lead to extraordinary student knowledge and understanding. It is an inspirational sight when students light up with the aha, and they light up at different times, mind you. And that's because of the strategies you as the teacher have thought ahead and planned. So you're going to have to highlight your critical lessons. Now, critical lessons are, you have these end outcomes in mind, and you identify your lessons that are most critical. These lessons can't be shortened or cut from the sequence because of lack of time or some other interference. So planning your unit roadmap for learning is an excellent way to stretch your thinking and implement the big vision. Having clear goals and deciding what routes best allow you to reach those goals, your destination then becomes achievable. And our book, Culture in the Classroom, helps you with those strategies to ensure that students are learning. So we have, in step 2, we have 1, 2, 3, and then we have 4. We have a 4th. This is still phase 2 in understanding the flow of your unit. So you have to highlight now your instructional strategies. So I got a little ahead of myself. That's where culture in the classroom comes in. You've got your checklist sheet, and this is a nice way just to look and say, I need to look at CA4 to how to engage students. I'm going to take a look at maybe CA3 to see how I can arrange my classroom environment to reflect the outcomes I want for this unit. So then when I do that, then I turn to that page. CA2 talks about integrating students' customs, values, and practices into my teaching of new content. So I look at my example teacher behaviors. These are strategies that I can use to meet that standard. So it gives me example behaviors. I can use previewing activities, relevant hooks. I can have somebody come in from the community and talk about this. And then when I employ those strategies as an educator, I look over to see if my students are exemplifying some of these behaviors. If they aren't, then I have to go back and change my strategy, because the teacher's strategy needs to elicit that student engagement piece. So phase one was deciding the big overview. Where are you going? What are your standards? Phase two is understanding the flow of the unit. Now phase three talks about identifying gaps and misconceptions. And this should take you anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes. So you have to identify the most critical prerequisite concepts that a large group of students may not have. And this reminds me of when I was teaching fourth grade and we were doing our, I don't want to call it astronomy really. It was the Earth and how it revolves, rotates on its axis, and then revolves once a year around the sun. And we were having this conversation, and I had the globe and we had a sun and a flashlight, and we had the little planet strung out, and I was walking the globe around the sun and teaching and spinning it at the same time. And then I put the globe down on my desk and proceeded to talk, and one of the students, Robert in the back, raised his hand and he said, "Mrs. Lee, if that's true, then why don't we just fly off?" And I said, "Well, I don't understand what you mean, Robert." And he said, "Well, why don't we just fly off?" And I said, "Well, come up here and explain to me what you mean by just flying off." So he came up and he took his fingers and he walked on the outside of the globe all around it, and he said, "You mean to tell me we're just walking around out here like this?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Then why don't we just fly off?" And so I said, "Robert, that is a wonderful question." And I said, "Tell me, how do you think we're staying on here now? What's keeping us here?" And he went on to explain that he thought the sky was like a lid, that we were in like a bowl, and that the bowl had a lid on it, and that was the sky, and that kept us all in. And that sparked a wonderful conversation, because I told him, you know, the ancient Egyptians kind of had a similar view. And so then it led to deeper understanding. But without that dialogue, that critical piece of that misunderstanding of his concept, he couldn't have grasped the new content at all. So plan for supports to address the gaps. You know, I didn't plan for that gap. It just happened and I had to address it there. Oftentimes in our manuals, it'll say misconceptions. And so you can pre-teach these, but sometimes they just come at you. So identifying the misconceptions based on the benchmark. I think we've just talked about that. And, you know, what misconceptions might hold students back. And then plan for them if you can. So this is phase 3, and it should have taken you about 15 to 25 minutes. Then finally in phase 4, we have to plan for those differentiation. The students who get it very quickly, and the students who take a little more time, and then the ones that are just in the middle of the road. So we need to consider, oh, come on. Here we are. And we always make adjustments based on our students. It doesn't make any sense to make adjustments based on anything else. Come on. Okay. I'm going to get off this page. And then we have to close out. That takes about 5 minutes. Are there any special needs unique to your unit that you haven't already identified? And then consider your diversity, things that you have to consider. One year I had, well, more than 1 year, I've had students in wheelchairs. You know, you have to consider all your learning, your everything so it's accessible to them. Now, I want to stress here, when you're planning your unit, that your standards have to be met by all your students. Those are grade level standards, and you cannot dumb them down. Now, the way you get to making sure that students meet that standard can be different. The mode you choose for one student does not have to be the same as another. Someone might show you with paper and pencil. Someone might do better with a project. So the way you meet your standard is your license as a teacher. So I want you now to pause the PowerPoint, and in your table groups, discuss the format of this protocol. How can this template be useful to you in planning your unit? And then be willing to share your insights. And this should take you about 10 minutes. Next, we're going to start talking about now how to unpack the standards. And this is really critical. This is hard many times for people. So what I've done, this is also a handout that you have. So please pull it up, put your unit template protocol unpacking, how to unpack a unit template protocol aside for a minute, and just take a look at how to unpack a standard from goals. And create your goals from that. So this is what you have in front of you. You have this standard. It's an anchor standard, grade 7, reading literature. And it says to determine the meaning of words and phrases as they're used in a text, including figurative and connotative meanings, analyze the impact of a specific word choice on meaning and tone. Now this came right off of that Laska website that I had earlier. When you open that site, you're going to see different columns. There'll be one for standards, and then there'll be one that says learning targets. So I opened the learning targets, and it tells you the knowledge and the concepts students need to know for this standard, what reasoning levels they need to reach, and what skill and product should be produced. So it helps you in creating and unpacking the standard and creating your goals. So you have this template now in front of you. And the cultural standards that I chose, now just because I picked them doesn't mean that they're hard and fast and that you can't pick others. But I said that when they're reading these phrases and these words, because it's literature, that the piece of literature they're reading could be from their own culture, could be from several different cultures. And they're going to use that then to interpret the reading. And also that the learning experiences that I'm going to walk them through can also be integrated with the local community and environment. And then the challenging part, the analyzing, the evaluating, the synthesizing, is from Standard E. So take a look at this for a minute. It has 4 steps. The first step is to identify the standard. Okay, so we're going to identify our standard. I'm going to go back a minute. Excuse me, I got a little ahead. And we identified them. You're going to pick them from the Alaska Content Standards, from the Cultural Standards, from Habits of the Mind, however, wherever you get them, these are your standards. Step 2, you're going to write goals from the standard. So this is where I jump down now to number 3. I come down to 3 and I identify the constructs of the goal. So what I do is I underline the verbs or the verb phrases up in the standard. So determine is a verb. I would underline it. What am I determining? The meaning of words. So I would circle that. and phrases, including figurative and connotative meaning. Actually, you know what I would do is I would underline determine the meaning of words and phrases, and then I would circle figurative and connotative meaning, and then I would underline analyze the impact, and I would circle of specific word choice and meaning and tone. So that's what I need to do. And then you see at the very bottom, what is the goals verb or verb phrases? You can write them there if you need to. So when I say determine, analyze, I would then decide the cognitive complexity of this standard. Then I would go back and finish too. So what you're going to do now is with a partner at your tables, you're going to do exactly what we just talked about. And then after you do that, you're going to write I can statements. And your I can statements are written as if you were the student being taught that unit or lesson. So these are the big ideas that students will own at the end. These I can statements are the unit benchmarks and must be assessed. So remember, the standards are written in educator language, and by creating the I can statements, they get translated into student-friendly language. So students know at the end of this unit, this is what I'm supposed to be able to do. I can stand up and say, yes, I can do that. Yes, I understand that. And yes, I can perform that task. So at your tables, take a few minutes and write the I can statements. Welcome back. Here are some examples that I wrote. They're not better, they're not probably, maybe not even as good as some of you have written, but I broke it down into things that I can do after this, things that I can explain, and I can demonstrate. So there's not a right way here, except that kids can identify that at the end of this unit, after I'm done using literature and teaching, that they can identify words and phrases and text, and they can interpret their meaning. That they can identify figurative words and phrases, and they can interpret them correctly. They can identify the connotative words and phrases and can interpret them correctly for meaning. And they can analyze the impact of specific word choice on meaning and tone within a text. Things that they can explain. What is the meaning of figurative and connotative? And how can knowing the meaning of the words and phrases help me understand text? So these are things that these are benchmark things that I would be assessing continually to meet that standard. And those are things that you would be doing too. So next steps, continue to practice on your own with unpacking units and unpacking standards, practice with peers and small groups. And at your staff meetings, take some time to share ways you're being successful, because in the end, you don't want to just be opening your manuals and turning pages. That's not lifting it off the page and really making it real for students. When you unpack your unit and you make it meaningful to students, students achieve. And I don't think there's any written law that you have to teach every single page in your manual. As long as you meet the standards of that unit, that's where that license for teaching comes in. And using classroom culture in the classroom gives you the strategies for that. So take some time now for Q&A, things you're wondering about, things that you realized, ways that you might improve what you've heard here. And take some time just to unpack what you've heard in this webinar. If you have further questions, feel free to contact us, CERC, in any one of these ways. Someone will get back to you. And now, I want to thank you for your willingness to engage in this work, your commitment to your students, and your commitment to each other. And thank you for being honest in your reflections and in your participation. Thank you, and we have a wonderful, wonderful day.